Okay, so we are practicing reviewing 5th and 6th grade stuff before we get to our 7th grade stuff. So right now we're just going to hit a little bit on everything and we'll see how it goes. So the first thing we're doing is subtracting 5 6 and 1/4. 5 6 minus 1/4. So I'm going to take, I like to do it vertically. Why is that circle there? And I'm going to put 5 6 minus 1/4. So what's the first thing we have to do when we subtract? You have to find the least common multiple, which is the same as your least common denominator. An easy way to do that is write down your two numbers and make yourself a T-chart and find your multiples. What are the multiples of 6? 6, 12, 18. Now we can do our 4s. What are the multiples of 4s? 4, 8, 12. We can stop right there because we have found a common one. We have found a common one. So the least common multiple for 6 and 4 is 12. Are there others? Yes. 24 would be another common multiple, but it's not the least. Could you still find your answer with 24? Yes, but at the end you'd have to simplify. And even this, sometimes you have to simplify. So we're doing, now that we have our common denominator, now our job is to find an equivalent fraction of 5 6 that has a denominator of 12. What are you going to ask yourself? How do you get from 6 to 12? Times 2. So what are we going to do to the top? Times 2. Because 2 over 2 is equal to what? 2 over 2 is equal to 1. That's why whatever we do to the top, you have to do to the bottom. 5 times 2 is 10. Now we're going to do our bottom one. Our bottom one says, how do we get from 4 to 12? Times 3. And what is 1 times 3? 3. Now we can subtract. Now we have common denominators. Now all we have to do is subtract our numerators. 10 minus 3 is 7. So our answer would be 7/12. Okay, there's our answer. So that would be our answer. The next question on this warm-up is adding a negative is the same as. So yesterday we talked about, we had a number line and we talked about directions. What direction do you go when you're adding? What direction do you go when you're subtracting? And what direction do you go when you're adding the opposites? So if we are doing this, then we're asking, how do you get, if we are adding, which direction do we go? Let me change my color. If we are adding, which direction are we going to go? So when we're adding, we're going to go to the right, just the way you learned in first grade, second grade, just the way you learned in first grade, second grade. You had 2 plus 4, or let's say 2 plus 3. You're going to start at the 2 and you're going to jump 3. 1, 2, 3, and you're going to end up at 5. You're going to the right. When you're adding, you're always moving right. Does it matter where you start? What if you start with -2 plus 3? Does the direction change? No, the direction does not change. Our starting point changes, but that's it. We're going to start at -2 and we're going to move 3 spaces to the right. 1, 2, 3, and what are we ending up at? +1. So our answer would be +1. So when you are adding, it doesn't matter where you start, you're always moving right. Just the same way you learned in elementary. When you're adding a positive number, you're moving right, which means that your brain should tell you, oh, that means my answer has to be bigger than what I started with. Now, what happens when we are subtracting? Let's go back to elementary. When you learn to subtract, which direction were we going? When you learned to subtract, we were going left. Anytime you were subtracting, you were going left. So you were saying, if we had something like 3 minus 2, 3 minus 2, what's our starting point? 3 would be our starting point. And how many hops are we going? 2, and we're going this direction. We're going left. So our answer would be 1. Okay, now what if you start at a negative? What if you have negative 3 minus 2? Is that going to change anything? Does that change the direction? That does not change the direction. That only changes your starting point. We're starting at negative 3. Because we're subtracting, we're moving left. 2 hops to the left, and it's going to leave us at negative 5. Then we talked yesterday about adding negatives, What happens, we talked about if you're adding a number, you're going to the right. But then we said, what happens when you're adding a negative? You have to change direction. So we talked about adding a negative being the same as what? Adding a negative is the same as subtracting. So adding a negative is the same exact thing as subtracting. It falls in the same group as subtracting because we're moving to the left. Because it's the opposite of adding. We're not just adding, now we're adding a negative. So for some examples, we could say 3 plus negative 2. This is us adding. There's our operation sign, adding, and we're adding a negative. There's our sign. We're adding a negative. Now that we're adding a negative, we're going to start at 3. I'm going to put it up here so you can see it. If we were adding, we would go this way. But because we're adding a negative, we have to go left. So I'm going to go 2 spaces to the left. And where's it going to land me? At 1. Which did the same thing as this. 3 minus 2 is 1. 3 plus negative 2 is 1. Same exact answer. Same exact directional movement. We're moving the same direction. What if you start off with a negative? If we start off with negative 3 and we're going to add negative 2, does that change the direction? We're still adding a negative. What did we say adding a negative was? We're going left, just like subtraction. Our starting point is different. So now I'm going to start at negative 3, and I'm going to do 2 hops to the left because I'm adding a negative. So my answer would be negative 5. So adding a negative is the same as subtraction. Now, we didn't do this, but we can just include it in here really quick. It's going to make it really messy, but what's the other thing we can do? So one thing is adding, another thing is subtracting. Then we have adding a negative. What do you think the next one is? Subtracting a negative. Subtracting a negative. And guys, I know that looks really ugly, but if you can understand it as, what do you think it would look like? You only have two options. It's either going to go left or right. There's only two directions it can move, left or right. So even though we have four different things, they can only move in two directions. So if adding a negative is the same as subtraction, what do you think subtracting a negative would be like? The same as adding. Subtracting a negative is the same as adding. So when you see something like this, 3 minus negative 2. 3 minus negative 2. That looks ugly, right? That was one of the ugliest ones we had in 6th grade when you were subtracting a negative. But if you can think of it as, wait a minute, if I'm subtracting, I'm traveling in the direction of my subtraction, but because I'm subtracting a negative, I have to go this direction. It's the same as addition. I'm going to start with 3. It's the green line, guys, if you lost it. If I'm subtracting, I'm going this way, but because I'm subtracting a negative, I'm going the same direction as my positive. So 3 minus negative 2 is exactly the same as 3 plus 2. It's exactly the same. What do you think is going to happen if we start off with, look at this one, negative 3 minus negative 2. Is that going to change the direction? We're only looking at this right now. Which direction are we going? The same as, we're going right, the same as adding. We're subtracting a negative, so it's the same as adding. The only thing that's changing now is we're starting at a negative point. Our starting point is changing. We're starting right here at negative 3. If we were subtracting, we'd go this way, but because we're subtracting a negative, we have to go this direction. Negative 3 minus negative 2 is going to equal to 1. Oh, negative 1, sorry. Negative 1. Can't see my negative. Negative 1. Now it looks like an ugly equal sign. All right, so everybody understood that? Yes. If you don't, we're going to be practicing this more and more. But this number line is just, you probably won't even be using number lines because you're going to be doing huge numbers. But it helps you understand, why is it that people say that adding a negative is the same as subtraction? Why is it that people say that subtracting a negative is the same as adding? This is why. Because the direction is the same exact thing. This is exactly why. All right, another thing we were wanted to practice on with this same video is including some mixed numbers. Yesterday, we did, actually, we weren't even going to do negatives yet because negatives is part of 7th grade stuff. So we'll do away with the negative. We're still reviewing 5th, 6th grade stuff. So we're doing 2 1/3 plus 5 2/5. Okay. I told you yesterday that I liked to do my fractions the same way that we do big numbers when we're adding vertically. I like to set them up like this because it makes it easier for my brain to set them up. All right, so again, like we did a while ago, first thing we have to do is find what? First thing we have to do is find a least common denominator of 3 and 5. So let's count by threes. We're going to do 3 and then 6, 9, 12, 15. I could probably stop there. Now we're going to do 5. 5, 10, 15. There's my common denominator. And most of y'all can do it in your head without having to do this table, and that is great. If you can't do it yet, this is the perfect way to start. All right, now we're going to ask ourselves, how do we get from 3 to 15? 3 to 15 is times 5. What are we going to do with the top? Also times 5. So 1 times 5 would be 5. Now notice how another way I could have done is I could have turned these into mixed numbers. I could have turned them both into mixed numbers and added my fractions like that. But let's try it this way, okay? Because we know that these are whole numbers, and our whole numbers are going to stay there. Our whole numbers are going to stay there. We might have to carry over, and I could draw a picture of that, but let me finish this. So let's do the next one. How do we get from 5 to 15? Times 3, and 2 times 3 is 6. So now we have 5 15ths, 6 15ths. What is, we can add them, 6 plus 5 is 11. So we are left with 11 15ths. Now all we have to do is add our whole numbers. 2 plus 5 is 7, and this would be our answer. That was it. Now, what if I would have done it this way? I would have still gotten the same answer. If I turn these into improper fractions, 2 times 3 is 6, plus 1 is 7. Let me switch colors. That would leave me 7 over 3. And then I am adding 5 times 5 is 25, plus 2 is 27. So I'm adding 27 fifths. So again, I'm going to do it vertically. I'm going to find the least common denominator, which is still 15. I'm going to find the least common denominator. Now, how do I get from 3 to 15? Times 5. So 7 times 5 is 35. 5 times 15 would be, 5 times 3 is 15. 27 times 3. Uh-oh, I need to do that on the side over here. 27 times 3. Guys, if you all catch me doing something wrong, correct me. I'm trying to do this fast. 21, 6, 7, 8. 81 over 30 over 15. Now I can add my numerators. That's 81 plus 35. That leaves me 116 over 15. Am I done? I am not done. Now I need to go in and turn it into a mixed number. So I have to say how many 15ths. I have to say 116 divided by 15. And I'm going to take a wild guess and say that it's 7, only because I already knew my answer. 7 times 5 is 35, and this is going to leave me 10. And I am left with 11. 11 would become my numerator, and my denominator stays the same. And if I did a typo there, it's because this is too much. But anyway, which way was easier? Turning them into improper fractions or dealing with whole numbers over here? Which way was easier? Dealing with your whole numbers. Take your whole numbers and just do it that way. It just works so much better. All right, I'm going to do another one on subtracting fractions because I will not be doing these anymore. So I'm going to clear it, and I'm going to be doing a new one where we have to borrow. And I'm going to go ahead and set it up as 3 1/8 minus 2 3/4. Will that work? So, should I build it? I'm trying to do, that's going to be too big. Never mind. Let me just draw my circles. What I'm trying to do is, I'm taking 3 of these and 1/8 of a whole. I have 3 full and 1/8 of a whole, and I'm trying to subtract 2 full ones and 3/4 of another one. So I'm trying to subtract 2 of these and 3/4, and then deciding how much is left. Okay, well, that's pretty hard. So I'm going to start over with, I'm going to find my common denominator. What's going to be our common denominator? You can easily see it on this one. Our common denominator is going to be 8. Let me switch ink colors. Our common denominator is going to be 8 because 4 and 8 is the common multiple. Now, this one stays the same. What do I do with this one? Times 2, right? So this has to be times 2, which is going to be 6. Now, here's a problem. And it's not a problem. It's the same as exchanging, the same as borrowing when you are learning how to subtract regular numbers. So what we're doing is, we can't do 1 minus 6. Everybody agree with that? We can't do 1 minus 6. I can't take this 1 right here and subtract 6 pieces of it. But I can take this one right here, my whole, and cut it up into 8s, and then take out 6 of them. So what I'm doing is, I'm taking one of these 3 and I'm cutting it up to 8 pieces. So look at what I'm doing over here. I'm taking my 3, one of them, and it's going to become a 2, and I'm not changing the value. I'm cutting it up into 8/8. All I did is, I took the third circle right there and I cut it up into 8/8. Is it still there? Yes, it's still here. I'm just renaming it. I'm cutting it up. It's still the same value. Now how many do I have? 1 plus 8 is 9. 8s. I have 2 and 9/8. Is this 2 and 9/8? Let's see. 1 whole, 2, 8/8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, plus 1 more 8. These are my 9/8 right here. Do you see where my 2 and 9/8 are coming from? Now, can I subtract 6/8 from it? Now I can subtract 6/8 from it. There's 1. I'm going to subtract that one. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. What am I left with? 1 piece, 2, 3 pieces. I'm left with 3/8. What is 9 minus 6? 9 minus 6 is 3. Talk to me, guys. Now I have to subtract 2 minus 2. I'm subtracting this 2, so I'm getting rid of 2. So my answer is 3/8. 3 and 1/8 minus 2 and 3/4 is 3/8. I'm only left with 3/8. So if you can do this, guys, from here, I could have made this a negative. I could have made this minus a negative. That comes later. But if you don't know how to do basic subtraction of fractions, you're going to have a hard time with 7th grade stuff. So make sure you're practicing this. I'm going to go ahead and turn off my video and make it available to you all in your Google Classroom.